The ancient crystal hummed with desperate energy as High Oracle Zethkara pressed her six-fingered hands against its surface. The prophecy chamber filled with swirling blue light, and the words appeared in the air like burning stars. When darkness consumes the realm and the fire of destruction awakens, seek the Tamers of flame from the distant blue world. They alone can bind the eternal fire and save all worlds. Commander Vexilon burst through the chamber doors, his purple armor scorched and smoking. Oracle, the fire wraiths have broken through our third defensive line. The capital city burns, and our flame suppressors are useless against their attacks. We need those fire tamers now. Zethkara nodded grimly. The fire wraiths had emerged from the deep caverns 3 months ago. Creatures of pure destructive flame that turned everything they touched into ash and molten rock. Traditional weapons passed right through them, and their fire burned hotter than any forge. Entire planets in their star system had already fallen to these beings. The portal is ready, she announced. Our scientists have locked onto the blue world called Earth. The prophecy says we will find the fire tamers there. The massive portal generator powered up with a sound like thunder. Energy crackled between the twin pillars as a shimmering doorway opened to another world. Through it, they could see a strange landscape of green plants and blue sky. Send the beacon, Zethkara commanded. It will seek out the most powerful fire tamers on their world. A small silver device shot through the portal like a shooting star. On Earth, it streaked across the sky before suddenly changing direction. Instead of heading toward a military base or research facility, the beacon curved downward toward a dense forest in North America. Deep in the woods, Mike Henderson was arranging kindling in a perfect teepee shape when the sky lit up above him. The beacon crashed into a nearby tree with a flash of light and a sound like breaking glass. Mike looked up from his campfire preparations, scratched his beard, and walked over to investigate. Well, that's something you don't see every day, he muttered, picking up the still warm silver device. It was about the size of a smartphone but felt strangely alive in his hands. Strange symbols appeared on its surface, then suddenly shifted into English words. Fire tamer identified. Prepare for transport. Fire tamer? Mike laughed. I just like camping, buddy. But before he could say anything else, the device began to glow brighter. Back in the portal chamber, Zethkara watched as the beacon signal strengthened. Contact established. The fire tamer has been located. Just one? Commander Vexilon asked. The prophecy spoke of tamers, plural. Perhaps this one is their leader, the oracle replied. Initiating transport now. Mike felt a strange tingling sensation spread up his arms from the device. The world around him began to shimmer and blur. Hey now, wait just a minute, he started to say, but his words were lost as reality twisted around him. He found himself standing in a vast chamber filled with alien technology and beings that looked like tall, elegant purple-skinned humans with extra fingers and strange markings on their faces. Everyone was staring at him expectantly. Greetings, mighty fire tamer, Zethkara said, her voice automatically translated by the chamber's systems. We are the Kalthani people, and we desperately need your help. Our worlds burn, and only you can save us. Mike looked down at himself. He was still wearing his favorite flannel shirt, hiking boots, and cargo pants. His backpack hung from one shoulder, filled with camping gear. I think there's been some kind of mistake. I'm not a fire tamer. I'm just a guy who likes to go camping on weekends. The assembled Kalthani exchanged worried glances. Commander Vexilon stepped forward. But the beacon found you. It was programmed to locate the most powerful fire tamer on your world. Look, I can start a campfire pretty good, and I know my way around a camp stove, but that doesn't make me some kind of fire wizard, Mike explained. You might want to try the military or maybe NASA. They probably have actual experts. Suddenly, alarms began blaring throughout the chamber. Red lights flashed as a technician called out in panic.
Fire wraiths approaching the city?
They've broken through the final barrier. Through the chamber's large windows, they could see dozens of creatures made of living flame floating toward the city. They left trails of fire in the air behind them, and everything they passed turned to ash. The city's defenders fired energy weapons that passed harmlessly through the creatures. We're out of time, Commander Vexilon said grimly. Fire tamer or not, you're all we have. Mike watched the approaching destruction and felt something stir inside him. These people were facing annihilation, and they had turned to him for help. He might not be a mystical fire tamer, but he was an Eagle Scout, a volunteer firefighter back home, and someone who had spent years learning how to work with fire safely. All right, he said, unslinging his backpack. I might not be what you expected, but I know a thing or two about dealing with fires. First thing we need to do is understand what we're dealing with. Tell me everything you know about these fire wraiths. Zeth-Kara quickly explained how the creatures had emerged from deep underground, how they seemed to be made of pure destructive energy, and how all conventional weapons and fire suppression methods had failed. Mike nodded thoughtfully as he pulled items from his backpack. You know, back on Earth we have a saying, fight fire with fire. But sometimes the best way to deal with fire is to understand it, respect it, and know exactly what it needs to survive. He held up a small camping shovel and a collapsible water container. These creatures might be made of fire, but fire has rules. It needs fuel, oxygen, and heat. Take away any one of those, and even magical fire has problems. The fire wraiths were getting closer, and the temperature in the chamber was rising. But Mike seemed oddly calm as he examined his camping gear with the intensity of a general planning a battle. I might not be the fire tamer you were expecting, he said with a grin, but I'm pretty good at making fires do what I want them to do. Let's see if camping skills work on alien fire monsters. Commander Vexelan looked skeptical, but Zeth-Kara placed a hand on his arm. The prophecy brought him here for a reason. Perhaps the universe has a sense of humor we don't understand. Outside, the first fire wraith reached the city's edge, and buildings began to burst into flame. Mike studied the approaching fire wraiths through the chamber's reinforced windows. They moved like jellyfish swimming through air, trailing ribbons of flame that turned the city's metal buildings into flowing rivers of molten rock. But something about their movement patterns reminded him of something familiar. They're following air currents, he said suddenly. Look how they drift and sway. These things aren't just flying randomly. They're riding the wind like hot air. Commander Vexelan frowned. What does that matter? They're still destroying everything they touch. Mike pulled out his camping multi-tool and began examining its various attachments. It matters because hot air rises and fire needs oxygen to burn. If they're following air currents, then they have to obey some basic laws of physics, even if they're magical. He turned to Zeth-Kara. Do you have any way to create wind or control airflow in the city? Our atmospheric processors can adjust air circulation, she replied. But why would that help? Mike grinned and pulled out what looked like a simple camp stove. Because I know how to make a fire go exactly where I want it to go. And if these things are essentially living fires, then I might be able to redirect them. Explosions rocked the building as the fire wraiths reached the outer districts. Through the windows they could see panicked Kalthani civilians evacuating in flying vehicles that looked like silver teardrops. We need to get closer to them, Mike announced, shouldering his backpack. I can't work with fire from a distance. That's suicide, Commander Vexelan protested. Our best soldiers can't even get near those creatures. Your best soldiers probably don't know how to set up a proper windbreak or create a controlled burn, Mike replied. Look, I've fought forest fires, dealt with gas explosions, and helped evacuate people from burning buildings. Fire is dangerous, but it's predictable if you understand it. He pulled out a small camping mirror and angled it to catch the light from outside. These things are pure energy, right? Energy that manifests as fire? According to our scientists, yes, Zeth-Kara confirmed. Then they're probably following the same principles as plasma, Mike said. Plasma can be contained and redirected using magnetic fields. Do you have anything that generates strong electromagnetic fields? The Oracle's eyes widened. Our shield generators use electromagnetic projection, but they're designed to stop physical objects, not energy beings. Perfect. We're going to turn your shields into a giant camping windscreen. 20 minutes later, Mike stood on the roof of the government building wearing borrowed Kalthani armor that felt like wearing a wetsuit made of metal mesh. The fire wraiths were 3 blocks away and approaching fast. Everything in their path simply ceased to exist, leaving behind only glowing trenches of melted stone. Commander Vexelan spoke through the helmet communicator. Shield generators are in position around the building, but I still don't understand your plan. Mike unpacked his camping gear methodically. When I'm camping and the wind is blowing my campfire around, I set up a windbreak to redirect the airflow. Same principle here, just bigger. He assembled what looked like a bizarre combination of camping equipment and alien technology. His portable camp stove was connected to the building's power systems through cables he'd improvised from his gear. His camping shovel was mounted on a tripod made from collapsible tent poles. Fire needs 3 things: fuel, heat, and oxygen, he explained as he worked. These creatures seem to be generating their own heat and fuel, but they still need to interact with the oxygen in your atmosphere to manifest as fire. The first fire wraith crested the nearby buildings, its form rippling like a living torch 50 feet tall. The heat from it made the air shimmer, and Mike could feel sweat beating inside his helmet. "Now," he said calmly into his communicator. The shield generators activated, but instead of creating a solid barrier, they generated a complex pattern of electromagnetic fields that created invisible channels in the air. Mike had spent the last 20 minutes calculating wind patterns and air pressure differentials using principles he'd learned from years of managing campfires in difficult conditions. The fire wraith hit the redirected airflow and suddenly veered to the left, its form stretching and distorting as it was caught in an unexpected wind current. Instead of flowing toward the government building, it was pushed toward an empty plaza where Mike had positioned his improvised equipment. "It's working," Commander Vexlan shouted. "But what happens when it reaches your position?" Mike activated his camp stove, but he'd modified it using Calthani technology to burn much hotter and brighter than normal. "I'm going to feed it." The fire wraith, drawn by the intense heat source, flowed toward Mike's position like water running downhill. As it approached, Mike used his camping shovel, now magnetized and connected to the shield generators, to create precise air currents that guided the creature's movement. "What are you doing?" Zethkara's voice crackled through the communicator. "Creating a controlled burn," Mike replied. "Every good camper knows you never try to completely extinguish a fire when there's dry fuel around. You control it. Give it what it wants in a safe place and let it burn itself out." The fire wraith surrounded Mike's equipment, its flames dancing higher as it fed on the energy from his modified camp stove. But instead of growing larger and more destructive, something unexpected happened. The creature's chaotic movements became more organized, more peaceful. Its flames shifted from destructive orange-red to a calmer blue-white. "The thermal output is stabilizing," reported a technician monitoring from below. "The creature's energy signature is becoming more coherent." Mike made small adjustments to his equipment, fine-tuning the energy output like he was adjusting a campfire to get the perfect cooking temperature. "I think these things aren't naturally destructive. They're just confused, lost. They emerged from underground where they probably had a stable energy source, and now they're burning everything trying to find what they need." The fire wraith's form became more defined, less chaotic. Through the flames, Mike could almost make out something like a face, alien but expressing what seemed like relief. "Can you communicate with it?" Zethkara asked. Mike slowly reached into his backpack and pulled out a simple camping lantern. He turned it on and began flashing it in a pattern: 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. The fire wraith's flames pulsed in response. 3 short pulses, 3 long ones, 3 short. "Universal SOS, they're not monsters," Mike said quietly. "They're refugees. Something drove them out of their home, and they've been burning everything because they're desperate and afraid." He adjusted his equipment again, creating a more stable energy field. "I think I can teach them to control their fire, the same way I learned to manage campfires. It's all about understanding what the fire needs and giving it just the right amount." More fire wraiths were approaching. Drawn by the calm behavior of the first one, Mike began setting up additional stations using his camping gear and whatever Calthani equipment he could adapt. "This is going to take a while," he said. "Hope you folks have some coffee. This reminds me of the time I had to teach a whole Boy Scout troop proper fire safety, after they nearly burned down half of Yellowstone." Commander Vexlan stared at the peaceful fire, wraith floating near Mike's improvised campsite. "Our greatest military minds couldn't solve this problem." "Sometimes," Mike replied, adjusting his camp stove like he was cooking dinner in the wilderness. "You don't need the greatest minds. You just need someone who knows how to make friends with fire." By dawn, Mike had established what looked like the galaxy's strangest campground. 7 fire wraiths now floated peacefully around different stations he'd built using his camping gear and Calthani technology. Each creature maintained a steady, controlled flame that provided warmth and light without destroying anything nearby. "This is remarkable," Dr. Zal Enth, the Calthani's chief scientist, said as she scanned the nearest fire wraith with her instruments. "Their energy patterns have completely stabilized. Whatever you're doing, it's working." Mike poured himself coffee from his camping thermos and offered some to the gathered aliens. Most politely declined, though Commander Vexlan tried a sip and immediately regretted it. "It's basic campfire management," Mike explained. These beings are essentially living fires, so they follow the same rules. Give them the right amount of fuel, proper airflow, and contained space to burn, and they become useful instead of destructive. He gestured to where one fire wraith was hovering near a group of Kalthani engineers. Look how curious they are. They're not mindless destroyers, they're intelligent, beings who were just in distress. The fire wraith he was pointing to had dimmed its flames and was carefully observing the engineers work on, repairing fire damage to a nearby building. When one engineer struggled to weld a broken beam, the creature moved closer and focused its heat to help with the repair. They want to help, Seth Kara observed. But why did they emerge so violently from the deep caves? Mike pulled out his camping binoculars and trained them on the distant mountains where the creatures had first appeared. Something spooked them. In my experience, when animals run from their natural habitat, it's because something bigger and scarier moved in. Suddenly, the ground beneath their feet trembled. The fire wraith's flames flickered nervously, and they began moving in agitated patterns around their energy stations. "What's happening?" Commander Vexlan demanded. Mike watched the fire wraith's behavior carefully. They're afraid. Something's coming. The mountain range in the distance began to glow with a sickly green light. Cracks appeared in the peaks, and a sound like grinding stone echoed across the landscape. Then something enormous began to emerge from the largest mountain. "By the ancestors," Seth Kara whispered. The creature that pulled itself from the mountain was the size of a city. It looked like a massive spider made of black stone and green fire, with hundreds of legs that carved trenches in the landscape as it moved. Where the fire wraiths burned with clean, controlled flames, this monster radiated heat that turned sand to glass and stone to lava. Seismic readings indicate it's heading directly for the capital, Dr. Zal-Enth reported, her instruments going crazy. At current speed, it will reach us in 6 hours. Mike studied the creature through his binoculars. No wonder the fire wraiths ran. That thing isn't just using fire, it's consuming it. Look how the flames around it get pulled toward its body. Indeed, small fires on the mountainside were being drawn into the creature like iron filings to a magnet. Even the fire wraith seemed to be struggling against an invisible pull. "It's a fire devourer," Commander Vexlan said grimly. "The legends speak of such creatures, but we thought they were myths. They consume all forms of thermal energy until entire worlds become frozen wastelands." Mike set down his binoculars and began rummaging through his backpack with new urgency. "Well, that changes things. You can't fight a fire by feeding it when there's something trying to eat all the fire in the area." He pulled out items that seemed completely inadequate for facing a city-sized monster. A small camping axe, some rope, a flashlight, and what looked like a bag of marshmallows. What can human camping equipment possibly do against that? Dr. Zal-Enth asked. Mike grinned. "You'd be surprised what you can accomplish with the right tools and a little creativity. The key is understanding that even the biggest fire has weak points." He turned to the fire wraiths. Using his camping lantern, he began flashing complex patterns of light. The creatures responded, their flames pulsing in increasingly sophisticated sequences. "You're communicating with them," Seth Kara said in amazement. "Teaching them, actually. Every good camping trip includes fire safety lessons." Mike continued his light patterns while pulling out a simple camping compass. "I'm showing them how to work together instead of just reacting to fear." The fire wraiths began moving in formation, no longer drifting randomly but organizing themselves into precise patterns around the city. Mike had taught them the camping principle of creating fire breaks, controlled barriers that prevent fires from spreading where you don't want them to go. "Impressive," Commander Vexlan admitted. "But how does this help us against the fire devourer?" Mike pointed to where the monster was slowly crushing its way across the landscape toward them. "That thing is basically a huge vacuum for thermal energy. It's pulling in all the heat and fire around it to grow stronger. But what happens to a vacuum when you give it more than it can handle?" He began setting up what looked like the most complex camping arrangement anyone had ever seen. His camp stove was connected to multiple Kalthani power sources. His tent was being erected using alien materials, and he was carefully positioning mirrors and reflective surfaces in precise angles. "I'm going to overload it," Mike announced. "Same principle as when you're dealing with a grease fire in a camp kitchen. You don't pour water on it. That just spreads it around. You smother it by cutting off its air supply or overwhelm it with more than it can consume." Dr. Zal-Enth's instruments detected massive energy buildup from Mike's improvised equipment. "The thermal output you're generating is enormous, but still nowhere near enough to satisfy that creature's consumption rate." That's where the fire wraiths come in, Mike replied. He flashed another series of signals with his lantern, and the creatures began moving into new positions around the city. I'm not going to feed it more energy. I'm going to teach it proper campfire etiquette. The fire devourer was now close enough that they could see individual details of its terrible form. Its 100 legs left trails of molten rock, and the air around it shimmered with heat distortion. Where its green flames touched buildings, they didn't just burn. They consumed the very concept of heat, leaving behind structures that cracked from sudden, absolute cold. Mike finished his preparations and stood up, brushing dust off his flannel shirt. All right, everyone might want to step back. This is either going to work, or we're all about to become the galaxy's first alien s'mores. He activated his equipment just as the fire devourer reached the city's outer edge. The creature's attention immediately turned toward the massive heat source Mike had created, its green flames reaching out hungrily. But instead of feeding the monster, Mike's plan was about to teach it that even the biggest appetite has limits. And sometimes the best way to deal with an uncontrolled fire is to show it what controlled fire looks like. The fire devourer's attention locked onto Mike's heat source like a moth drawn to a flame. Its massive form shifted direction, crushing buildings as it turned toward the government complex. The creature's green flames reached out hungrily, but as they touched Mike's carefully prepared energy field, something unexpected happened. Instead of consuming the heat, the fire devourer's flames began to sputter and flicker. Mike's equipment wasn't just generating raw thermal energy. It was creating specific patterns and frequencies that confused the creature's feeding mechanism. It's working, Dr. Zelenth shouted, monitoring her instruments. The creature's energy absorption rate is dropping rapidly. Mike adjusted his camp stove settings like he was fine-tuning a barbecue grill. The trick is giving it exactly what it doesn't expect. This thing has probably been consuming wild, chaotic energy for thousands of years. It doesn't know how to process something that's been properly managed. The fire wraiths, responding to Mike's earlier training, began executing their part of the plan. They formed a circle around the fire devourer, their controlled flames creating a barrier that prevented the creature from reaching out to consume other heat sources in the city. You've trapped it, Commander Vexilon realized. But for how long? Long enough for Phase 2, Mike replied, pulling out his camping rope and what appeared to be a grappling hook he'd improvised from tent stakes and climbing gear. Now comes the fun part. The fire devourer thrashed against the barrier of controlled flames, growing more agitated as it realized it couldn't feed properly. Its green fire began to change color, shifting toward orange and red as its energy reserves depleted. Mike secured his rope to the building's roof and began rappelling down toward the creature. Someone once told me that the best way to deal with a dangerous animal is to get close enough to understand what it really needs. That's insane, Zethkara called through the communicator. The thermal radiation alone should kill you. But Mike's improvised suit of Kalthani technology was holding up better than expected. More importantly, the fire wraith seemed to be creating small pockets of cooler air around him as he descended, their controlled flames acting like thermal shields. As he got closer to the fire devourer, Mike could see that the creature wasn't just a monster. It was sick. Its stone shell was cracked and leaking energy, and its movements were erratic like an animal in pain. This thing isn't evil, he said into his communicator. It's starving. Look at those cracks in its shell. It's been damaged probably for a long time. It's consuming everything because it can't properly store energy anymore. The fire devourer noticed Mike's approach and turned one of its massive eyes toward him. Instead of attacking, it seemed almost curious about this small being who wasn't running away in terror. Mike pulled out his camping mirror and began reflecting light in careful patterns, the same communication method he'd used with the fire wraiths. The creature's green flames flickered in response, uncertain but definitely trying to communicate. It's trying to talk, Mike announced. Give me a minute here. Through a combination of light signals and careful manipulation of his heat sources, Mike began to understand the creature's situation. The fire devourer had been injured in some ancient catastrophe, its natural ability to regulate thermal energy damaged beyond repair. It had been wandering for millennia, consuming everything in a desperate attempt to heal itself, but only making the problem worse. It's like a campfire that's gotten out of control because the fire ring is broken, Mike explained to the listening aliens. You can't just add more fuel, you have to fix the containment first. Mike began climbing onto the creature's shell, using his camping gear to secure himself to the rough stone surface. The fire devourer remained still, seemingly understanding that this strange being was trying to help. "What I need," Mike said, examining the largest crack in the creature's shell, "is something that can seal these gaps and help it regulate its energy properly." Dr. Zalanth's voice crackled through the communicator. "Our construction teams use thermal sealant for building repairs. It's designed to handle extreme temperatures. Perfect. And I need the fire wraiths to help create a stable energy field while I work." Over the next several hours, Mike worked like a cosmic mechanic, using a combination of human ingenuity and alien technology to repair the fire devourer's damaged shell. His camping tools proved surprisingly effective. The small camping shovel worked perfectly for clearing debris from cracks. His rope and climbing gear let him access difficult areas, and his methodical approach to problem-solving kept him focused despite the incredible scale of the task. The fire wraiths hovered nearby, their controlled flames providing exactly the right amount of energy to help the healing process. They seemed to understand what Mike was trying to accomplish and adjusted their output to match his needs. "Energy levels are stabilizing," Dr. Zalanth reported. "The creature's thermal signature is becoming more coherent." As Mike sealed the last major crack, the fire devourer's green flames gradually shifted to a warm golden color. Its movements became smoother, less desperate. The crushing weight of its steps lightened as it learned to control its massive form properly for the first time in ages. Mike sat down on the creature's shell and pulled out his thermos of coffee. "There we go, big guy. Feel better?" The fire devourer's response was to generate a gentle, warm glow that felt like sitting next to a perfect campfire on a cold night. Its massive eye looked down at Mike with what could only be described as gratitude. "Remarkable," Zethkara breathed. "You've healed a creature we thought was a mythical destroyer." Mike took a sip of his coffee and looked out over the city where the fire wraiths continued to hover peacefully, their flames now working with Kalthani engineers to help rebuild the damage that had been done. "Sometimes the things that seem most dangerous are just crying for help," he said. "Back home, we have a saying, only you can prevent forest fires. But sometimes the best way to prevent a fire is to understand what it really needs and help it find a better way to burn." The fire devourer began to move again, but this time its steps were careful and controlled. It was heading back toward the mountains, but the green destructive flames were gone. In their place was a steady golden light that warmed the air without burning anything. "Where is it going?" Commander Vexilon asked. Mike watched the creature's retreat with satisfaction. "Home, I think. Now that it can control its energy properly, it can go back to whatever it was doing before it got hurt, probably keeping those deep caverns warm for other creatures that need a safe place to live." As the fire devourer disappeared into the mountains, its golden light continued to glow from the peaks, creating a warm beacon that would guide other lost creatures home. 3 weeks after the fire devourer's healing, Mike found himself in the strangest teaching position of his life. The Kalthani had converted their largest conference hall into what they called the Flame Management Academy, but Mike just thought of it as the galaxy's first fire safety course. "Now remember," he said to a class of purple-skinned aliens, each carefully tending a small controlled flame, "fire is like a pet. Treat it with respect, give it what it needs, and it'll be your best friend. Ignore it or treat it badly and it'll cause problems." Student Kessara raised her hand. "But Fire Tamer Mike, what if the flame grows larger than expected?" Mike smiled at the title they'd given him. He'd stopped correcting them weeks ago. "Good question. Anyone want to take a guess?" Another student, Thondar, tentatively answered, "Remove one of the 3 elements fire needs." "Exactly. Fuel, heat, or oxygen. Take away anyone and you control the size." Mike demonstrated with his trusty camp stove, adjusting the flame from barely visible to a strong cooking fire. "It's all about understanding what you're working with." Through the classroom windows, they could see fire wraiths floating peacefully throughout the city. The creatures had become beloved residents, helping with everything from heating buildings to assisting with metalwork. Children drew pictures of them, and poets wrote songs about their gentle light. Dr. Zalanth entered the classroom carrying a datapad filled with reports. "Mike, we've received communications from 17 other worlds in our sector. They're all reporting similar fire wraith emergencies, and they're asking for help." Mike looked up from his demonstration. More fire wraiths running from damaged fire devourers? It appears so. Your theory was correct. There are wounded fire devourers throughout this region of space, and they've been displacing fire wraith populations for centuries. Commander Vexelan joined them, looking more relaxed than Mike had ever seen him. His armor now bore decorative flame patterns that the fire wraiths had helped etch using precisely controlled heat. The High Council has voted unanimously. They want to establish a Galactic Fire Management Corps, with you as the chief instructor. Mike sat down heavily in his camping chair. Folks, I appreciate the offer, but I'm just one guy with some camping gear. I can't teach the whole galaxy how to handle fire. But you can teach us to teach others, Zethkara said, entering the room with several other officials. The principles you've shown us, understanding, patience, proper preparation, these can be shared. She activated a holographic display showing the local star system. Look what we've accomplished in just 3 weeks. The display showed planets that had once been marked in red as fire wraith danger zones, now glowing with peaceful blue indicators. Trade routes that had been closed for years were opening again. Entire civilizations that had been hiding underground were returning to the surface. The fire wraiths are natural healers, Dr. Zal-Enth explained. Once they're calm and controlled, they seek out damaged ecosystems and help restore them. 3 dead worlds in the Keth-Mori system are showing signs of life again, thanks to the gentle heat the fire wraiths provide. Mike pulled out his camping compass and studied it thoughtfully. You know, my grandfather always said that the best way to teach someone is to show them how to solve problems for themselves. He stood up and walked to the window, watching a fire wraith help a group of Kalthani engineers repair a bridge. The creature's flames were so precisely controlled that it could melt metal for welding, while keeping the air cool enough for the workers to stand nearby. All right, he said finally, but we do this right. No rushing, no shortcuts, and everyone learns proper safety procedures first. Over the following months, Mike's camping-based fire management techniques spread throughout the galaxy. The Kalthani translated his methods into hundreds of languages and adapted them for different species and environments. The key principles remained the same everywhere. Respect the fire, understand what it needs, create proper containment, and never be afraid to ask for help when things get out of control. Teams of trained fire tamers traveled to distant worlds, each carrying equipment that looked suspiciously like camping gear. They established peaceful contact with displaced fire wraiths, healed damaged fire devourers, and taught local populations how to live safely alongside fire-based creatures. Mike found himself traveling between worlds, but he always insisted on returning to the Kalthani homeworld every few weeks. It had become his base camp, and the fire wraiths there had become his friends. You know, he said one evening, sitting by what the aliens called a traditional Earth-style campfire, while several fire wraiths floated nearby. When I woke up that morning planning to roast some marshmallows, I never imagined I'd end up here. Zethkara, who had become his closest alien friend, sat beside him on a camping chair she'd learned to appreciate. The prophecy spoke of fire tamers who would save our worlds. It never specified what kind of fire taming would be required. Mike pulled out his bag of marshmallows. He'd convinced the Kalthani to synthesize them from Earth's molecular database, and began roasting them over the campfire. Sometimes I think the universe has a sense of humor. You needed someone to tame fire, and you got someone who just really likes camping. One of the fire wraiths drifted closer, its flames dimming to a gentle glow as it watched Mike prepare the marshmallows with obvious curiosity. Would you like to try? Mike asked, offering a marshmallow on a stick. The fire wraith carefully took the stick in a tendril of controlled flame and began rotating it slowly over the fire, its natural understanding of heat allowing it to achieve perfect golden brown marshmallows every time. Now that, Mike said with a grin, is proper fire management. As news of the success spread throughout the galaxy, more species began requesting help with their own fire-related problems. But Mike was no longer worried about handling the demand. He had trained hundreds of instructors, established safety protocols that worked across multiple species, and most importantly, he had proven that sometimes the best solutions come from the simplest approaches. The camping enthusiast had indeed become the fire tamer the galaxy needed, just not in the way anyone had expected. 1 year after his unexpected arrival in the Kalthani star system, Mike stood before the Galactic Council in what had to be the universe's most important camping demonstration. Representatives from 47 different species watched as he carefully arranged kindling in a perfect teepee formation. The fundamental principle, he explained to the assembled delegates, is that fire wants to burn upward and outward. Work with that natural tendency instead of fighting it, and you'll have success every time. The Zephyrian ambassador, a being that looked like a living crystal, pulsed with curious light. Fire Tamer Henderson, your methods have revolutionized how our species interact with thermal energy beings throughout the galaxy. But we must ask, do you believe these techniques will work on the stellar flames of the Andromeda region? Mike lit his demonstration fire with a simple match, the flame catching perfectly and spreading in a controlled manner through the arranged wood. Ma'am, I've learned that fire is fire, whether it's a campfire, a fire wraith, or something the size of a star. The principles don't change, only the scale. Behind him, a massive holographic display showed the current state of the galaxy. What had once been a map dotted with danger zones and restricted areas now showed a network of peaceful worlds connected by trade routes that fire wraiths helped maintain. The creatures had become the galaxy's most trusted guides, using their natural ability to navigate thermal currents to help ships travel safely between stars. Commander Vexlon, now director of the Galactic Fire Management Corps, approached the podium. Honored delegates, I want to share some statistics. In the past year, we've successfully relocated over 10,000 displaced fire wraiths to suitable habitats. We've healed 43 fire devourers who had been causing destruction for millennia. Most importantly, we've prevented an estimated 847 potential conflicts by teaching peaceful coexistence. Dr. Zalanth added her report from the Science Division. The ecological benefits have exceeded all projections. Worlds that were considered dead are now thriving, thanks to the controlled thermal energy provided by relocated fire wraiths. We've documented the return of hundreds of species that had been driven to extinction by uncontrolled fires. The crystalline delegate from Proxima asked, what about the legendary Great Fire at the galaxy's core? Our ancient texts speak of a massive thermal entity that has been dormant for millions of years. If it awakens, Mike extinguished his demonstration fire with a simple camping technique, cutting off its air supply by covering it with sand from a small bucket. Well, if that happens, I guess we'll pack some extra marshmallows and see what we can do. The comment drew laughter from species across the chamber, but Mike was only half joking. His success had come from treating every fire-related problem as a puzzle to be solved, rather than a monster to be fought. After the formal session ended, Mike found himself on the observation deck of the space station, looking out at a view that still amazed him. Fire wraiths danced between the stars like cosmic fireflies, their controlled flames creating beautiful patterns against the darkness. In the distance, he could see the warm golden glow from the mountains of the Kalthani homeworld, where the healed fire devourer continued to provide gentle warmth to countless underground creatures. Penny, for your thoughts? Zethkara joined him at the viewing window. She'd learned many Earth expressions over the past year. Just thinking about how this all started, Mike replied. A year ago, I was planning a quiet weekend camping trip. Now I'm apparently the galaxy's expert on fire management. Do you regret it? Mike considered the question while watching a group of young Kalthani pilots learning to work with fire wraith navigation partners. The creatures had proven incredibly skilled at detecting safe thermal currents through space, making interstellar travel faster and safer than ever before. No, he said finally. I've always believed that the best part of any camping trip is the people you meet along the way. I just never expected to meet quite so many different kinds of people. A soft chime indicated an incoming priority message. Zethkara checked her communication device and frowned. It's from the Andromeda observation post. They're reporting unusual activity from the stellar flames. Mike sighed and shouldered his backpack, which had become famous throughout the galaxy. Children on dozens of worlds now played with toy versions of Fire Tamer Henderson's miraculous camping kit. Well, he said, looks like we might be taking this show on the road again. How long does it take to get to Andromeda? With fire wraith navigation assistance? About 3 months, Mike grinned. Perfect. That'll give me time to teach the crew proper campfire safety and maybe work on some new techniques. I've been thinking about what to do if we encounter fire creatures that exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. As they walked toward the docking bay where the newest ship in the Fire Management Corps waited, Mike reflected on how much his life had changed. He'd started as a simple camping enthusiast who knew how to build a good fire, and had somehow become the galaxy's most sought-after expert on thermal entity relations. The ship's crew, A mixed group of Kalthani, humans, and several other species greeted him with the informal respect he'd always preferred. His camping chair was already set up on the bridge next to the captain's station, and someone had thoughtfully provided a thermos of coffee, real Earth coffee, synthesized with exacting precision. "So, Fire Tamer," Captain Yelnara asked as the ship prepared for departure, "what's the plan for dealing with creatures made of stellar fire?" Mike settled into his camping chair and pulled out his well-worn notebook, filled with observations about fire behavior across dozens of worlds. "Same as always, Captain. We get to know them, figure out what they need, and see if we can help them find a better way to burn." Through the viewports, they could see dozens of fire wraiths taking positions around the ship, ready to guide them safely through the dangerous thermal currents between galaxies. What had once been considered the most hazardous journey in the known universe was now just another camping trip, with really good campfire companions. As the ship jumped to hyperspace, Mike opened his notebook to a fresh page and wrote, "Day 365 of the strangest camping trip ever. Today we're going to visit some fires that are literally the size of stars. Note to self, pack extra marshmallows." Behind them, the healed galaxy continued its peaceful existence, warmed by the gentle flames of creatures that had learned the difference between destructive burning and controlled fire. And ahead of them lay new challenges, new friends to make, and new ways to prove that sometimes the best solution to any problem is a calm voice, proper preparation, and the willingness to sit down around a fire and work things out together. The prophecy had promised fire tamers, and the universe had delivered exactly what it needed. Someone who understood that the most powerful way to tame fire was simply to treat it with respect and show it how to burn better.